Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Krehbiel Letter podcast, in which I look through the latest Krehbiel Letter and give you the highlights. If you'd like to read it, please go to krehbielgroup.com and go to the Krehbiel Letter tab, and you can download the latest issue, or you can just read the stories on the blog. Sometimes there's a slight difference between the print version and the version on the website, but they're generally the same. What I'm going to do is summarize the letter in this podcast, and then if you're interested, you can go read more. The first article in this letter, which is the February 2023 letter, is "The Chumpification of Publishers Continues." I realize that's a bit of an outlandish title, but I'll explain why I said that. The premise of the article is that publishers hasten their own demise when they put their content on the internet for free. Artificial intelligence is one of the final nails in that coffin, or the next nail in the coffin, perhaps. To follow along with my argument, I want to present a history of the internet, a publisher's history of the internet in 4 stages. The first stage is the World Wide Web. And at this time, this is when publishers were putting their content out supported by advertising. It was free to the reader, generally speaking. And that was a mistake. I should never have done that. But what that did was it accepted and encouraged the assumption that content should be free, supported by advertising. It downplayed, it diminished the value in the consumer's mind of the content that publishers were creating. Now, at that time, the content was still mostly on a publisher branded site. It was out there. You had to go get it. And the way you went to get it was through an informal network of links. Remember, in those days, there were link farms and everybody had a link strategy and all that sort of thing. Well, that died out to some degree when you get to the second phase, which is the search engine. And here, you're no longer going to a site and following links. You're going to a central place, like Google or Bing or whatever, and you're typing in a query, and it's giving you a list of what they deem to be the most relevant things to your query. That was a huge improvement. You didn't have to follow links. You could search for stuff and find it, which was very cool. And that was a huge improvement. But publishers were chumps because Google amassed billions using their content. And in some cases, publishers paid to play the game. It really wasn't very smart. The next phase I call the Facebook phase. And in that case, content continues to exist out on publisher branded websites, but it also exists inside walled gardens, inside Facebook and that sort of thing. It was a big change if you think about it conceptually. First the content is just out there. Next, you have a central place where you can get a good list of content. Now you have a central site, Facebook, where the content is curated based on your friends and your connections and what Facebook wants you to see. And the content, you don't even have to leave Facebook to see the content in some cases. Publishers were chumps this time because they allowed sites like Facebook to use their content to build Facebook's business model, right? I mean, the operative strategy of big tech is all your customers become my customers. And that's what Facebook did, and publishers played along, and they were chumps. The fourth phase is AI. Now, this is really just the next logical step, but it represents a big sea change in that the content is no longer out there. If I go to ChatGPT and I put in a query, who knows where that content came from? It's all being fed into the language model, and ChatGPT is giving an answer. You don't even know where the answer came from. You don't know what brand it came from. You don't know what site it came from. You don't know what the AI is relying on for this. The publisher has disappeared. There's no link to the publisher. There's no reference to the publisher. The publisher gets no credit whatsoever. Now, publisher's original sin has basically come home to roost, and this was, in some ways, the inevitable result of putting content on the internet for free. Now, that raises a few questions. Would this trajectory have been avoided if publishers had not exposed their content for free in the first place? I don't know. Did publishers make the right decision anyway? Someone could say, okay, sure, publishers were chumps, but they did get some revenue as they rode that wave into the sharp rocks on the shore. And there's something to be said for that. Publishers did make a lot of advertising revenue against their content. Another question would be, can we put the genie back in the bottle? If publishers now choose to protect their content behind paywalls and such, and thereby starve AI of professional information, will that devalue the results from AI to the point that people will prefer information from humans. I'm not so sure, because there will probably still be enough people putting their content out there for free that the AI will always have enough information to feed the engine. And then finally, is there a revenue model where the people who create the content that feeds the AI model can get some credit for the answers that are produced by the AI? I don't know. I would hope so, because otherwise, publishers are just total chumps. They're giving content to ChatGPT. So when someone says, what's the difference between a Roth and a traditional IRA? And they go to ChatGPT, and the content is coming from Kiplinger and Forbes and all these other places, and those guys get no credit whatsoever. It's all just from ChatGPT. All right. By the way, pardon my appearance. I'm recording this on the weekend, and this is Greg on the weekend. Publisher of the Gaps is the next article. And the takeaway here is that the areas where publishers can add value is shrinking. And don't look for diminishing niches. Think more broadly about your strategy. There's the purpose of the origin of the topic of this article is there's an old argument in theology called the God of the Gaps that says, we used to need God to explain thunder and famine and life and various kinds of things. And as science explains those things, God kind of shrinks and God becomes the God of the gaps. The things that we can't explain with science, we explain with God. It's not the greatest argument, but it's a common argument that you see out there. Anyway, I raise it because something analogous is going on with publishers. When I first started in publishing, a publisher could make a living just going down to the federal agency, getting the documents, photocopying them, putting them in a binder, and shipping them out to people who would be interested. Well, obviously that doesn't work after the internet because anybody can go to the agency website and download the text, right? So publishers got out of the pure text business. And this reminds me of a rule that Rick Kelly, an old colleague of mine, explained. He called it NTAP, News, Text, Analysis, and Planning. And his argument was, okay, we're past the text side, and we're not in the news side of things in the company I was working for. We needed to focus on analysis and planning. Well, that was a good strategy back then, but now AI can do analysis and planning, right? So the sphere for a publisher is shrinking. What is there left for a publisher to do? And that's why I refer to this as the publisher of the gaps. And I think publishers need to think about this in terms of where can they do things that AI still can't do? Or even if AI can do it, where people don't trust AI to do it. And that's what I think for the next couple of years, publishers are going to have to focus on that. Now, perhaps whatever AI can't do today, it'll be able to do next week. That may very well be true. But we're going to have to keep looking for those niches where we can provide human analysis and meaning in a way that AI can't do. All right, next article is called Pareto, the Pareto Principle for Publishers. And I'm sure you've heard of the Pareto Principle. It's the idea that 20% of causes account for 80% of effects. And think about that as a publisher. That might mean that 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your content. So obviously focus on that high-performing content. 80% of your web traffic may come from 20% of your pages. So optimize those pages for SEO and for stickiness. 80% of top performing pages may come from 20% of your authors. So incentivize those authors to get more content from them. 80% of customer complaints may come from 20% of your products or services. Well, identify and address those issues to cut down on your customer service costs and to improve customer satisfaction. And then finally, there's a million ways you could divide this. These are just the examples I'm giving. 80% of sales may come from 20% of your distribution channels, so focus on those distribution channels. Now, I have a couple of quick thoughts that I'll go through quickly. Try removing the word webinar from your marketing. If you do webinars, do an A/B split. One where you use the webinar and one where you use some other word. There seems to be some evidence that that word suppresses response. Now, for those of you who get the print copy of the letter, did you notice the scent? I've been putting a smell, oils with smells, in the letter so that it has a scent to it. And the reason I do that is because I frequently say that a print publication should be the best print publication it can be, and an online publication should be the best online publication it can be. And it got me thinking, well, what can a print publication do that an online publication can't do? Well, one thing it can do is have a pleasant smell. And that might enhance the reading experience when you pull out the paper and there's a pleasant smell. So anyway, just a silly little thing that I tried. Another thing that I think is very important, when people teach communication skills, they say when someone says something to you, it's good to repeat back, okay, what I heard is this. And that's good for husbands and wives and friends and all kinds of other situations, but it's really important when you're dealing with technical people, because the marketing people or the editorial people or the product development people might have a completely different concept of what they mean than what the technical people are hearing. And it's very important when you say something that you say, get the technical people to say, repeat back what I said. And you do the same. When they say something, you repeat it back. Make sure that you're going back and forth, that you understand one another. And one good way to do that is to repeat back what you think that you heard, because frequently what you think you heard isn't what they were thinking. All right, the next one is the use and misuse of demographics. And the key takeaway is it doesn't matter what audiences in general want. It matters what your audience wants. And publishers should be wary of trend analysis that doesn't take demographics into account. The example I use is book talk. I saw somebody saying how, book talk is the democratization of book reviews, and we're crowdsourcing what books are good and so forth and so on. And that's interesting and cool. But if you look at the demographics of book talk, they're very specific. And that might not be the demographic for your books. So what's happening on book talk might be completely irrelevant to what you're doing for your audience. So in the same way, when I see all these things about understanding Generation Z, it's like, I don't know. The alleged characteristics of an entire group are not necessarily relevant to a publisher who's focusing on a specific group, right? Like, for example, nobody really writes a magazine for women. They write a magazine for English-speaking women in a certain age range, probably of a certain socioeconomic status, who read magazines. And they probably are fine-tuned even a little further than that. So what might apply generally to women doesn't necessarily apply to this women's magazine or a men's magazine or whatever it is. You can't take the overall demographics and let that guide you too far. You need to make sure that you're looking at things that are relevant to your demographic. And then finally, the last article here is alternatives to words on a page. And I read this interesting article. It came from the Bosak's email newsletter. If you don't get it, you should sign up for it. After reading a suggestion that audio content can make readers more loyal, I started thinking, okay, what are some other alternatives to words on a page? And here are a few. Audio, like I said, video, charts, graphs, quizzes, infographics, outlines, checklists, forms, polls, surveys, podcasts, micro-learning, user-generated content, which could also be text, but it's new, and data visualization. Now, those are just some things that I came up with. I'm sure there are a lot more. The idea is don't limit yourself to one way of presenting your information. With the Krehbiel Letter, I send it out in print. I have an email. I have it on my webpage, and I have a downloadable PDF. I do this podcast, and I do a video version of a podcast. So I'm trying to get the content out as many ways as possible and in a slightly different format for each environment. And I think that's a good strategy for a publisher to pursue, to get their content out there in a way that whatever way people want to react to it. I have 5 children, and when I try to contact my children, different ones respond to different things. Like some of them respond on WhatsApp. Some of them respond through this thing called Marco Polo, where you send a video back and forth. Some of them respond to chat. Some of them respond to email. It's different, just with my 5 kids. So your market is the same way. Some of them like text messages. I hate it when a business sends me text messages. Some people like to see things on Facebook. Some people like to see things other places. So try to focus on being broad about how you present your information so you can reach a larger group. Well, that's it for this edition. Please go to krehbielgroup.com if you're interested. And if you haven't yet, sign up for the Krehbiel Report. Thanks.